3 assistants, 3 days, all of them fired by the same man. A billionaire CEO in a wheelchair with the coldest blue eyes you've ever seen, and a reputation that terrified an entire skyscraper. No one lasted. No one dared try. Until the woman who talks to herself walked through the lobby, with milk on her shirt, mismatched earrings, and absolutely no idea she was about to flip this man's entire life upside down. Like this story, subscribe and comment your city, because what's coming next? You won't see it coming. No one makes it a week here. The third assistant in 3 days stumbles down the marble corridor, tears carving hot tracks through perfectly applied makeup. Her sobs echo off glass like an alarm. People step out of doorways and watch with the polite cruelty of office witnesses. A phone is raised. A hand covers a mouth. Somebody whispers a joke that isn't funny. Someone else checks their watch, as if time itself will explain why this place chews people up and spits them out. Inside the office, he sits like a statue that still breathes. Austin Morgan, tailored suit, hands steady on the arms of a custom wheelchair. The city spreads behind him in a geometric grid of windows. His face is all angles and reserve. His eyes are a hard, controlled blue. He doesn't have to rise to command a room. He simply does not look away. "Human resources will process your exit," he says, voice quiet but absolute. "Have a good day." The words land and the woman crumbles. The door clicks shut. In the hallway, murmurs ripple like wind through dry leaves. Someone counts. 3 in 3 days. It is a record. It is a warning. It is a curse. He calls the accident an inconvenience. The accident taught him precision, taught him that the world can be reshaped if you press hard enough. Since then, he has built a fortress of rules, schedules that run like metronomes, expectations that have no margins, a management style so clean it is almost surgical. Laughter has been an expensive, unnecessary luxury. Emotions are a liability. Perfection is the capital. A door opens without a knock, and a different kind of presence enters the room. He knows the sound before he registers the person. Mr. Morgan Sr., polished, amply dressed in vintage arrogance. The man's smile is the kind that arranges the room around it. He sizes the scene and says, 3 assistants in 3 days. That will not do. His voice carries the weight of a family name in a checkbook, and when he orders coffee, staff move like clockwork. They walk down to the ground floor cafe because his schedule says they will. The cafe is warm, pendant lights, wood, the smell of coffee brewing thick enough to be comforting. It is one of the few places in the building where even Austin can be less visible, less under glass. He wheels in with a practiced ease that contradicts the accident story and tells himself he is not performing. He is simply being present in a world of steam and small human noise. She is behind the counter, hovering over an espresso machine like it might confess its secrets if treated with enough coaxing. Her hair is tied back in a hasty ponytail, a faint smear of milk on her sleeve, hands moving in a mix of careful and chaotic. She presses a button, frowns, presses another, inhales in a silent pep talk. "Okay. Vera," she tells the machine in a voice that is half pep talk, half apology. "It's foam, not the nuclear codes. You can do this. I believe in you. Be nice." The machine hisses. A spray of milk decorates the sleeve of her uniform like confetti. She stares at it and laughs, an unguarded sound that brightens the counter. She wipes at the milk with the hem of her apron, as if trying to erase an embarrassing confession. Then she slides 2 cups onto a tray with the exaggerated care of someone carrying something fragile and important. One for the woman who orders too loudly, one for a man who orders without making eye contact. Mr. Morgan Sr. watches her with that curious hunter's interest. "Bring her here," he says before Austin can object. There is a look exchanged, half amusement, half calculation. "She has something," the older man says. Humanity. Say what you will, Austin. You need someone who remembers how to be human. She notices them then and freezes, as if the universe just handed her an unscripted scene. Oh, hello, she says, cheeks flushing the faint pink of someone who has been caught speaking to a machine. She recovers instantly with the kind of energy that is both charming and slightly alarming. 2 cappuccinos, no casualties today, she announces like she's reporting a minor victory. Mr. Morgan Sr. slides a card across the counter. The card is heavier than a business card should be, embossed with a family crest and a single line. Human Resources. Morgan Tech. Tell them I sent you, he says with the casual certainty of someone who expects things to happen when he suggests them. She reads the card as if she is decoding an invitation to a foreign country. Me? Morgan Tech? Her voice is a mix of bewilderment and delighted panic. Are you sure this isn't a prank? She looks from the man to the card to Austin, who is watching, an eyebrow raised the smallest fraction. There is a small, nearly invisible shift in him because of her. Something like curiosity, thin, dangerous, the kind that people like him bury beneath lists and rationalizations. He says nothing. His mother says everything instead. Bring her to my office Monday, 9 o'clock, and don't be late. She finishes her coffee with the precise manners of a matriarch who issues orders like blessings. She walks out of the cafe clutching the card as if it were an unexpected boarding pass. On the way, she thinks aloud to herself, habit, defense mechanism. A nervous ritual that has kept her steady through early morning shifts and late night rushes. Okay, Vera, don't faint, don't spill, smile like you belong, short, confident, fake it till you make it. Right. You've got this. Monday arrives far faster than she expected. The building that swallowed people like a machine swallows her too, but she pushes forward with the kind of reckless hopefulness that only someone who has never been polished can possess. She steps into the wrong elevator. The mirrored doors make her look twice as uncertain. Executives glance up. She smiles like someone performing in public for the first time. When the doors open onto the fortresses of glass and chrome, an HR woman is waiting with the sort of clipboard that has been trained on dozens of recruits and found them lacking. We're on the 41st floor, the HR woman says, handing her an ID badge, an iPad, a handbook so thick it could be used as a doorstop. Welcome to Morgan Tech, Ms. Ramos. He likes his coffee black, 84 degrees Celsius, white ceramic, no sugar. Vera repeats it under her breath like a mantra for survival. 84 degrees Celsius, she says, the number lodged in her mouth like a foreign word. No sugar, white mug, got it. She tries the iPad's touchscreen with the tentative curiosity of someone asking permission to sit on a chair. When the office doors open and she sees his silhouette against the skyline, something in her throat tightens with nerves, and with the sort of ridiculous thrill that only living on the edge of panic can produce. He meets her gaze like someone inspecting a specimen. For a beat, there is nothing. The building hums around them, phones tapping, printers whispering, the distant murmur of a city that believes in wheels and wrists and wealth. You are my assistant, he says simply, the sentence a pulley releasing its weight. She laughs before she can stop herself, an involuntary noise that is equal parts fear and pride. Technically, she replies, fluttering. I can make a mean cappuccino, though. I labeled the foam once. Twice, actually. It's a hobby. She fumbles for words and finds them like loose coins in a couch. Across the glass, people watch and whisper bets on how long it will last. Some wager an afternoon, some a week. Someone already posts a mental obituary on the whiteboard of workplace optimism. Vera straightens. She breathes in. Okay, Vera, she says to herself, loud enough for 2 people to hear. Don't get fired before lunchtime. The line between neat horror and blunt tenderness is thin in that room, and for a moment the air changes. He stares at her, studying the way she talks to herself like a map of small, stubborn humanity. She doesn't know corporate timers or etiquette codes, but there is something more dangerous than inexperience. She is unashamedly herself. If you're watching this right now, do me one thing. Hit like. subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Trust me, you'll want to be in the room for what comes next. Vera Ramos did not sleep. Not because she wasn't tired, she was exhausted. Mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and in ways science had not yet discovered. But because her brain spent the entire night replaying one moment. Mr. Morgan Sr. sliding that fancy business card across the cafe counter like he was casting her in a movie she did not audition for. By sunrise, she was standing in front of her tiny bathroom mirror, holding her mascara wand like it was a weapon, and muttering to herself. Okay, Vera, it's fine. You're just starting a new job. In the tallest building in the city. For the scariest CEO alive. Who definitely hates chaos. And you are, literally, chaos. She dabbed foundation on her face with unnecessary aggression. Positive thinking, manifestation. Universe, don't embarrass me, please. At least not in the first hour. She attempted to tie her hair back into a sleek ponytail. Unfortunately, the universe wasn't listening. The elastic snapped. Vera froze. Okay, plan B. She gathered the hair into a messy bun that leaned slightly to the left. Asymmetrical. Very artistic. Maybe they'll think I'm creative. At 8:12 a.m., she was dressed, wearing slightly mismatched earrings, holding a cheap tote bag, and giving herself one final pep talk in the mirror. You got this. Or at least you'll try to have this. Or you'll pretend to have this until you actually have it. Yes, great, go. She marched out the door. The Morgan Tech skyscraper loomed above her like it was judging her existence. All glass, all sharp angles, all expensive enough that walking inside made her feel like her shoes weren't allowed to touch the floor. The moment she stepped through the revolving doors, she was hit with a wave of perfume, cologne, polished marble, and the emotional weight of being extremely out of place. Everyone wore suits. Perfect hair, perfect posture, perfect silence. Vera stepped aside to let an entire group of executives speed walk by. She accidentally bowed at them for reasons unknown to man or God. Sorry, yes, no, go ahead, I'm just existing here. She cleared her throat, held her tote bag tighter, and eyed the elevators. There were 6 of them. 5 were sleek, silver, corporate elevators, with small plaques reading, floors, 220. Employees only. The 6th elevator, wider and glowing with soft golden light, had an intimidating plaque. Floors 21 to 45, executive access. Oh no, she whispered. This is a trap. The building is setting me up. Still, she should have waited for the employee elevator. She knew that. But when one of the executive elevators chimed and opened, completely empty, she panicked, gasped, and stepped inside. The doors closed behind her before she could escape. Oh, no, Vera. What have you done? This is why you don't make spontaneous decisions. This is exactly why. She hit the button labeled G, but her trembling finger accidentally hit 40 instead. The elevator began to rise. No, I said ground floor. Ground. I'm not an executive. I shouldn't even be unsupervised. She pressed buttons again. Nothing changed. The universe was laughing at her. Loudly. By the time the elevator neared the 40th floor, Vera was pacing back and forth, muttering at her reflection in the gold-trimmed doors. Okay, listen. If someone sees you in here, say you're lost. No, say you're delivering coffee. Wait, no, that makes you sound like you don't belong. Which you don't, but still, maybe. The doors slid open. A woman in a navy blue suit stood waiting, holding a clipboard and wearing a smile so sharp it could cut glass. There you are. Her tone was brisk, professional. You're late. Vera blinked. I am? Yes. Mr. Morgan Sr. told HR to expect you 30 minutes ago. Oh, HR, right. I'm supposed to be hired? You already are. Follow me. Vera's brain short-circuited. Hired? Already? But there wasn't even an interview. Shouldn't I sign something? A form? A document promising not to break anything expensive? The woman didn't slow down. I'm Linda. HR operations. And Mr. Morgan Sr. personally instructed us to onboard you immediately. She glanced at her clipboard. Your desk is ready. Your ID is printed. Your orientation packet is prepared. Welcome to Morgan Tech. Vera swallowed. Oh, wow. Thank you. I think. She followed Linda down a hallway so sleek and polished she could see her reflection on the floor. Every step echoed. Every employee they passed stared at her like she was either a celebrity or a warning sign. They stopped in front of a wide glass desk placed directly, painfully directly, in front of a pair of massive doors. The nameplate on the door read, Austin Morgan. Chief Executive Officer Vera nearly choked on air. Oh, no. This is too close. I should be in a corner, or behind a pillar, or underground. Linda didn't even blink. This is your workstation. My what? Here. Linda placed items on the glass desk rapid fire. A thick employee handbook, an iPad in a leather case, a sleek phone with 24 buttons, a gauge with her photo. She looked terrified in it. A printed sheet of rules so long it could double as a scarf. Vera stared at the avalanche of corporate responsibility. I think there's been a huge mistake. I don't have assistant experience. I barely have life experience. Linda ignored her. Your computer password is on page 2. You have access to Mr. Morgan's calendar, internal communications, and executive-level scheduling. I feel like I shouldn't, Linda continued. Mr. Morgan prefers his black coffee served between 84 and 86 degrees Celsius. Never 82, never 88. Exactly 84, 86. Vera's soul left her body. I don't even know how to measure Celsius in temperature, life. Linda handed her the iPad. And here is your mobile management device. Mr. Morgan will be out of a meeting in... She checked her watch. 2 minutes. Do not be late with his morning briefing. Briefing? What briefing? He has a briefing? Linda simply smiled the terrifying smile of someone who was not going to help. Good luck, Ms. Ramos. And then she marched away. Heels clicking in perfect rhythm. Vera stood alone, holding the iPad, handbook, badge, rule sheet, and what remained of her sanity. Okay. This is fine. This is survivable. Probably. She placed everything on the desk and took a shaky breath. Just sit. Sit and look competent, like a plant. A very useful office plant. She sat down. The chair was so soft she sunk awkwardly, making a squeaking noise that echoed down the hallway. She shot up straight again. No, sitting is dangerous. Standing is safe. She reached for the desk phone, squinting at the many buttons. Let's test a button. Just one. A small one. She pressed it. A beep sounded so loud it shook her bones. Then, through hidden speakers across the entire 40th floor, her voice echoed. Hello? Testing? Am I pressing something wrong? Oh no. Abort. How do I turn this off? Every employee on the floor turned to stare. Vera froze in horror. She mashed random buttons until the line went dead. Silence fell. Perfect, deadly, corporate silence. Then the CEO's door opened. Austin Morgan rolled out in his wheelchair, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her entire apartment, his expression carved from ice. He surveyed the scene slowly, his eyes landing on Vera. Wild hair, mismatched earrings, panic radiating from her like static electricity. Their eyes met. He blinked once. She swallowed loudly. Finally, he spoke in a voice that could freeze the sun. You activated the PA system. Vera nodded rapidly. Yes, I did. That was unintentional. Completely, accidentally intentional. No, accidentally accidental. Austin stared at her like she was a puzzle missing several pieces. Why are you here? He asked flatly. Your father hired me, she blurted. I mean, he forced HR to hire me. I mean, he handed me a card and I didn't know what to do, and then the building swallowed me and... Austin held up a hand. Silence. She stopped rambling mid-sentence. Austin looked at the materials on her desk. The badge, the handbook, the iPad, the rule sheet. He exhaled slowly, an exhausted sigh that carried years of frustration. I see, she winced. Is that a good I see, or a why are you breathing in my general direction kind of I see? His jaw tightened. It's the I don't have the energy for this kind. Oh, she nodded. Okay. Valid. He looked at her for another moment, studying her like she was an unpredictable science experiment. Can you follow instructions? He asked. Vera hesitated. Loosely? His eyes narrowed. She corrected herself instantly. Yes, absolutely. I can follow instructions. Very loosely. I mean tightly. Very tightly. Another long, painful silence. Finally, Austin turned his wheelchair around. Come in, he said sharply. You have a briefing to give. Vera blinked. Me? Briefing? Briefing me? Or me briefing you? Because only one of those is logical, and it's not the one you're asking. Now, Ms. Ramos. She scrambled into his office, nearly tripping over her own feet. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Austin positioned himself behind his desk, folding his hands, his ice-blue stare locked onto her. Vera stood in front of him, clutching the iPad like a life raft. So, he said quietly, you're my new assistant. She nodded, every muscle in her body tense. I'm apparently so. He arched a brow. You don't seem prepared. Oh, I'm not, she said honestly. Not even a little. He stared. She coughed nervously. But I learn quickly. I think. I hope. Please let me. Another long silence stretched. Then, to her shock, Austin leaned back slightly. Very well, he said. We'll see how long you last. She inhaled sharply. Like an hour? A day? A week? We'll see, he repeated. Vera nodded, whispering to herself under her breath, but just loud enough for him to hear. Okay, Vera, don't get fired before lunchtime. Austin's lips twitched, almost into a smile. Almost. She arrived at her desk before sunrise had fully let go of the city, the glass panes still holding the night like a layer of polite silence. The iPad felt heavy in her hands, the handbook heavier, and the badge around her neck swung like a small accusatory medal. She told herself that first-day nerves were a fashion accessory. Wear them, adjust them, and no one would notice, but the truth was simpler and more humiliating. She was terrified. Her to-do list, a scribble in a cheap notebook she had tucked into her tote, was ambitious and naive. Organize Austin's calendar, print investor packets, prep for 10 o'clock briefing, don't break anything expensive. She added a second line later. Don't talk to the copier like it's a sentient being. The second line was aspirational and already bankrupt. At 9:03, she realized she'd brought the wrong files. Of all the absurdities the day had in store, this seemed like a small, laughable thing until she opened the wrong folder in the conference room and watched a sea of crisp suits blink in unison. Instead of the Q2 investor packet, she had placed a stack of flyers from a local charity where she'd volunteered, handmade, glitter-splotched, earnest. For a heartbeat, the polished room held a suspended, uncomfortable amusement. The marketing director's eyebrow rose like a skeptical flag. The CFO's lip twitched as if resisting a smile. Vera's mouth went dry. Oh my God, she whispered to herself, as if the wrong folder might somehow be contagious. Her fingers fumbled to shuffle papers that were not meant to be shuffled in that room. She told herself the flyers could be charming. She told herself many things that morning, and most of them were lies. Then, because the universe favored dramatic timing, she tripped over an unseen cable. One foot snagged, the other followed like a doomed duet. Her elbow slammed into the water pitcher sitting on a side table. A perfect arc of clear liquid performed a slow-motion ballet and then demolished half of the meticulously arranged documents. The pictures, their tumbling done, left a constellation of beads across the expensive mahogany. The room went still as if the air itself had been hired to witness her humiliation. Papers stuck together, printers hesitated in their mechanical coughs, and the CEO, Austin Morgan, watched with a look that would have frozen most people solid. Vera's first instinct, true and unrenounceable, was to narrate. "Okay, Vera," she said aloud, a reflexive pep talk that had saved her in drive-through lines and 1,000 awkward customer service moments. "We spill, then we smile, then we apologize. Repeat." Her voice cracked on the last syllable. That's when something strange happened. Austin exhaled a short, sharp sound that was not a scoff. It could have been mistaken for annoyance, but for a fraction of a second it sounded almost like suppressed laughter. It tugged at the corner of his mouth, and then he tightened his face and resumed his corporate glacier. Someone, further down the table, stifled a giggle. Then another. The sound propagated, small and human, and Vera felt the warmth of it like a hand on her shoulder. The glass wall behind the executives showed reflections of people easing out their shock with the gentlest of smiles. The room exhaled collectively, and the ice that had lived in that room for months, possibly years, shifted. After the meeting, the rumor mill stirred into action. Hallway whispers traveled faster than email chains. "She brought glitter flyers to an investor meeting," said one voice, delighting in the absurdity. "She spilled water on the CFO's notes," another added, as if collecting badges of dishonor. Someone in IT had already made a joke about installing varnish on the office floors. The phrase, "she won't last the week," reemerged like a worn talisman, and bets were placed in the form of knowing looks and clipped comments. Austin watched the gossip like one might watch ants crossing a sunlit patch of concrete, detached, mildly interested. There was a calculation in his stare, a measure of a variable that spreadsheets could not account for. He watched her when she wasn't trying to be seen, when she whispered to herself as she sorted her desk, when she straightened a crooked frame, and then frowned because she could not count how many times she'd done it wrong, when she pressed the iPad screen like it might bite. That afternoon, Vera's calendar imploded in glorious, spectacular fashion. She had mixed up the meeting times, double-booked the strategy session with a marketing brainstorm, and an external call with a potential partner. People arrived in the wrong rooms. Conference calls went unanswered. One presenter, forced to improvise during a missing live demo, offered charm where a slide should have been and was rewarded with awkward applause. Juliet Hawkins watched from the doorway like a hawk eyeing a fledgling on the wrong branch. She was every rumor refined into human form, beautiful in a way that made people nervous, sharply dressed and carryingly cold. Where Vera's gestures were loud and uncertain, Juliet's were small, controlled, and precise. When she smiled, it was a measured thing that promised consequence. She moved through the office like she owned it, though legally that was not entirely accurate. Psychologically, however, the ground tilted to her favor. "Is she new?" Juliet asked one of the assistants in a tone that implied the universe was unfair and someone must be fixing it. "Yes," the assistant replied. "This morning, Mr. Morgan Sr. insisted on immediate onboarding." Juliet's gaze slid toward Austin's office, where he sat like a calculation in human form, her lips pressed together. "We'll have to be careful." Careful was Juliet's shorthand for containment, removing risk through strategy, isolating anything that might cause discomfort, preserving the polished image she curated like a museum curator preserving artifacts. To her, Vera's unpredictability wasn't charming. It was a crack, and cracks spread. Vera survived the afternoon by improvisation, a talent forged in coffee shops and in the kind of workplaces where you learn to fix problems with a roll of duct tape and inappropriate optimism. She apologized until the words felt threadbare. She fetched files with the speed of someone who feared being yelled at, and she took calls with an earnestness that made overworked execs oddly fond. Her strange habit of muttering to herself became a private commentary track, that sometimes threaded a helpful suggestion into the room, like when she murmured, "He always prefers black," and saved a flustered intern from serving lattes to the wrong executive. The real trouble came, of course, in an arena that could not be avoided: coffee. The company prided itself on punctuality and on the sanctity of the CEO's morning brew. Austin's coffee was a carefully guarded ritual, prepared in his office by a select few, the temperature measured like a lab variable. Someone who broke that ritual risked more than a scald. Vera, however, was a creature of momentum. She had learned, through years of working crowded morning rushes, how to balance a tray like a ringmaster. On a day when meetings were collapsing into one another like dominoes, she was instructed, briefed in a whisper by a nervous intern, to bring Austin his coffee at precisely 9:15. She carried the tray with the concentration of a person crossing a tightrope. The hallway to Austin's office felt longer than any route she had ever taken. Carpets muffled her steps, but the sound of her heart was loud. She rehearsed apologies in her head, short, sincere, non-offensive. She rehearsed confidence as if it were a speech. She pushed the door open with her shoulder and walked into a chamber of precise order. Austin stood behind his desk with his usual composed posture. For once, she didn't try to be clever. She smiled and announced, "Coffee, sir. Black, 85 degrees. It was almost a miracle of timing. She set the tray down, a hand reached, a whisper of movement, and one of the cups tipped. Maybe the tray caught a sudden breeze. Maybe a floorboard betrayed her. Maybe it was chaos. The cup wavered, spilled a glossy crescent of coffee across the polished surface, and then began a gravity-fed pilgrimage off the tray. Time slowed. The dark liquid made a perfect arc, splashing across the desk toward a set of papers, a carefully arranged stack of whatever would have been central to the morning's most important meeting. The entire room inhaled. Vera gasped. The words that came out of her were exactly what she would have said, blunt, true, and horribly timed. "At least it's on the desk, not the carpet." And then something impossible happened. Austin's shoulders loosened. A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh, small and disbelieving, and perfectly human. For a breath, the building's chill gave way to a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Heads turned, mouths formed the shapes of astonishment. Juliet's face, for once, showed an emotion that was not part of her curated set. Surprise. The ripple of sound spread, a soft chuckle, then a larger laugh, then a few apologetic giggles. Vera's eyes widened in amazement and then in relief. She hadn't planned to be funny. She had only said what she thought. But the thing she had thought had pushed a button in him, the human button, and he had responded. That laugh circulated through the office like contraband. It was chewed over at lunch tables and whispered about in elevators. There were messages sent, "Did you hear?" and bets rescinded and new ones placed. The rumor mill worked in reverse. Instead of predicting her imminent demise, people began to whisper about whether she might, in a strange and unaccountable way, be exactly what the place needed. Tap like if you're enjoying the story so far, because what happens next changes everything. The days settled into a strange rhythm, like a song with an offbeat that somehow made people dance anyway. Vera learned to navigate Morgantech the way she had once learned to navigate a chaotic shift at the cafe. By watching, by listening, by copying the moves of those who looked like they knew what they were doing. She catalogued Austin's tiny rituals like a collector of curios. Black coffee, first thing. The right mug, the precise angle of his tablet, the way he favored silence over small talk unless it was calculated and useful. She memorized the names of his recurring meetings and the cadence of his days until she could predict, with alarming accuracy, when he would want the light lowered or the window shades adjusted. On her second week, she discovered the coffee gauge. It was a small digital thermometer tucked inside an otherwise ordinary kettle in a cupboard no one ever looked at. The number blinked an exact reading. She learned the difference between 82 and 84 degrees Celsius, the way baristas learn the difference between a good pour and a masterpiece. She learned how long to wait after steaming the milk so that the temperature would settle into the narrow window that seemed to soothe him. When she presented his morning cup, black, no sugar, in a white ceramic mug that fit his grip like it was designed for him, he watched her with something almost like approval. 84, she said, setting the cup gently on the desk. Perfect. He lifted the mug, tested it with a corner of his lips the way someone checks an unknown wine, and the corner of his mouth twitched. Good, he said, which in that office was practically a standing ovation. She began to notice other things. He liked the blinds lowered when the sun hit the monitors. He preferred files in a very particular order, alphabetical, then chronological. He took notes on yellow legal pads even though everything was digitized. When he was tired, his hand would tap his temple 3 times, and his eyes would lose their edge. She learned to watch for the tap, and to bring a glass of water and a single, brief suggestion. You should rest for 5, she would say. He would frown, blink, and then, most times, agree. He learned to let her interrupt the cadence he'd enforced for months. Her interruptions were small kindnesses at first, and then they became expectations. She would appear with the coffee, a tiny smile, a short story about the cafe, an absurd regular named Mr. Delgado who insisted his croissant was a work of performance art, or a stray cat who had a better sense of customer loyalty than most people, and the way she told it made his lips soften. She had a voice that made chaos sound like a favorite song. The stories weren't particularly important. What mattered was that they were real and unexpected in a world where everything was staged. Austin began to test her. He did it the way someone tests a bridge, by sending small weights across it to see if anything snaps. He asked her to reschedule meetings with impossible constraints. He asked her to find a document that supposedly only existed in a password-protected archive no one could access. He left instructions on his tablet that read like riddles, and watched her try to decode them. Each time she failed, she apologized and tried another approach. Each time she improvised. She would call the right person in a roundabout way. She would suggest a workaround that made no sense until it worked. She would charm an irritable technician into forwarding a locked file. Vera's improvisations annoyed the purists and delighted the practical. Why didn't you just tell me you couldn't get it? He asked once, after she produced an obscure memo from a forgotten folder. Because I didn't want to be the person who gives up, and I thought maybe there was another way, she said, breathless. Also, I ran out of time, and panicking is a very good motivator. He regarded her for a long second, and then, in a quieter way than she had ever heard him speak, said, Noted. Juliet noticed too. She noticed the way his attention lingered on Vera's little victories, and how the lines around his eyes relaxed when she was in the room. She noticed the extra time he allowed for a question, the fraction of a second of indulgence he gave for a joke. Those were things she had carefully trimmed from his life like bad habits. To Juliet, the CEO was an instrument she tuned. Anything that introduced noise was, by definition, a problem. She started moving pieces on the board the way a chess player adjusts pawns. Reassignments became her quiet weapon. A task that would have been Vera's went to someone else. A meeting was moved last minute without notifying the new assistant. Files disappeared from Vera's inbox and reappeared in others. Juliet quoted policy, with the pleasantness of someone offering tea, but the subtext was steel. At first it was subtle. Vera walked down one hallway to find the design draft she had been told to review already on another desk. She checked her calendar and discovered a luncheon had been added that conflicted with an investor call she had been preparing for. She pressed the phone to call Juliet, and the call went to voicemail every time. Technical issue, Juliet said when they finally spoke, sweet as a lemon. Must be a glitch. I'll make sure it sorts it out. You must be new to the ecosystem. Vera wanted to laugh, to explain that she had been a manager of chaos in 1,000 tiny espresso wars, and that she didn't need hand-holding. Instead, she said, Okay, thanks, and hung up, feeling the way a person does when someone takes a step, and you can't tell if they tripped or intended to. The office conversations shifted again. Some of the employees, previously wagering on how fast she'd fail, now watched with a different curiosity. Could she handle being discarded and then revived like a stubborn weed? Could she be the unexpected variable that made a dull machine work better? Others still whispered about the distraction and professional risk, and Juliet fed them with careful smiles and barbed asides. She began to seed doubts about reliability, about optics, about temperament. In her world, the smallest rumor metastasized into justification. Still, small tasks accumulated in Vera's charge. Austin trusted her with the simplest but most private things: a note to be handed to a particular board member at exactly 2:03, a bouquet to be arranged without fanfare for a minor celebration, retrieval of an old photograph from a locked drawer. She delivered them with a care she had honed, carrying trays through crowded cafe aisles. And with each discreet success, something shifted. The prickly distance around Austin softened. Once, when an urgent internal memo required immediate signatures and the legal team was unreachable, Vera took the initiative. She physically carried the stack from office to office and apologized politely for the interruption, and the signatures appeared like magic. On his desk that night, Austin left a small post-it note, the handwriting tight and unexpected. "Good work. Keep it up." Juliet saw the post-it with the same expression one might reserve for discovering a stain on a prized collection. She stared at it as if it were evidence of treason. That evening, she called a meeting with 3 senior staffers, her tone honeyed and precise as always, and outlined the risk scenario they faced should the CEO's public image be compromised by unpredictability. "We must protect the narrative," she said. "Perception is security. People must feel they can trust our leadership to be consistent." No one argued. They nodded because they wanted to be on the side of safety, the side that had produced results for years. Vera, for her part, accepted the small victories with a childlike grin that both enchanted and unnerved her colleagues. She would walk into Austin's office with a perfectly steeped cup and a banal anecdote. "The cat from 3B now owes me a loyalty card," and somehow the edges of the day rounded out. She became, in tiny increments, the person who reminded him that structure did not need to be sterile, and that humor could be a tool for human connection rather than a liability. The tension between method and chaos stilled into a fragile competitiveness. When Vera failed, the reaction was predictable: policy, protocol, concern. When she succeeded, the reaction was quieter, but deeper. Respect that didn't have to be loud to sting Juliet's carefully kept calm. The office had always preferred winners who looked like architects of intention. Suddenly, they were learning to accept a winner with coffee on her sleeve and stories in her hands. One evening, when the windows reflected the city's lights, and the building exhaled after another day of metrics and meetings, Austin watched Vera quietly straighten his tablet, and then, almost without thinking, said, "Take Friday off. Go home." She blinked, surprised and unsure whether she'd misheard the benevolence. "Friday?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Your work is adequate. You need rest." That was the compliment that was not a compliment, an admission he trusted her enough to interrupt. When she left that night, Juliet watched from her office, and the look on her face was not simply disapproval. It was the moment a plan hardened into necessity. Vera had become more than a temporary glitch. She had become a problem Juliet needed to solve before it became a precedent. The office was a different city at night. Morgan Tech's daytime hum reduced to a slow, polite heartbeat. Desks sat like islands under pools of lamplight. Monitors dimmed to sleepy moons. Vera had almost convinced herself she wouldn't come back, that she could leave the offending file in a courier bin and call it a day. But guilt is a practical thing, and the investor packet she'd rescued from the glitter flyer disaster needed one last signature. Besides, she had developed a terrible new habit: checking that nothing important was on fire. Her footsteps were careful, the sound of her rubber-soled shoes swallowed by the carpet. She moved through the hallways like someone navigating a museum after hours, curious, reverent, and very conscious of not upsetting anything fragile. The sky outside the glass windows had the color of old coins. The city blinked at her from afar. As she approached the double doors that led to Austin's wing, a faint sound threaded through the quiet. It was almost imperceptible. A metallic squeak, a soft grunting, the kind of noise that belonged to physical labor rather than corporate life. Vera paused. Her first thought was the copier being dramatic. Then she frowned. The sound had a rhythm, the rhythm of effort. She crept closer and found a small service door tucked between two maintenance closets. Light leaked from beneath it, a rectangle of warmth in the chill corridor. Vera's hand hovered over the handle. The rational part of her brain supplied a list of reasons not to open the door. Curiosity supplied a shorter list. None of your business, but also, what if? She opened it. The room was half clinical, half hope. Parallel bars ran the length of a rosewood floor, bolted into place with industrial seriousness. A treadmill whirred quietly in the corner. Resistance bands hung from hooks like colorful question marks. Mirrors lined one wall, reflecting effort in flattened repetition. And in the center of it all, Austin Morgan, impeccable suit jacket abandoned, gripped the bars with hands knuckled white, his face a map of concentration. He was trying to make his right foot move forward. It's hard to describe the smallness of that motion to anyone who hasn't watched recovery measured in centimeters. The room's air held sweat and something like prayer. A therapist in a blue polo stood beside him, voice calm and steady, counting steps, giving cues. Austin's jaw clenched. He took a breath, shifted his weight, and his right leg moved, 2 inches, a miracle in that place. Vera froze like someone who'd stumbled into a private act. Her first impulse was to retreat, to respect the privacy of pain. Then his foot slipped. It was not a dramatic fall. It was an undignified lurch, the kind that tears at control. The therapist's hand shot out. Austin lost his balance, and for a breath, the room registered the possibility of collapse. Vera moved before she could talk herself out of it. She crossed the floor with a clumsy speed born of panic and planted herself at Austin's side. Her voice, one of her few weapons, came out breathless and loud. Right leg, you can do this. Not jealous of the left leg. Come on, right leg, look, there's coffee afterward. Do it for the coffee. It was ridiculous. It was everything she was. It was also, in that suspended, difficult moment, the exact wrong kind of necessary. Austin's head turned. For a second, his eyes were wide, exposed in a way the boardroom never allowed. The therapist reached him, steadying the bar and the man. There was a flush on Austin's neck, the raw color of effort. He opened his mouth, maybe to scold, maybe to shush, maybe to demand how she'd gotten in. But the sound that escaped him was unanticipated. It started as a breath and then softened into something that might be called laughter, short, incredulous, a private release that bounced off the mirrored wall and seemed to surprise everyone, including him. Vera's cheeks heated. Sorry, she said automatically, then babbled. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I just came to return a file and then I heard, I'll go, I'll leave. Her hands fluttered uselessly at her sides. Austin steadied himself and, for once, did not hide the small cracks that made him human. He allowed a hand to drop to the parallel bar and leaned on it like someone who had been carrying too much. The therapist, David, gave a small nod, the professional signal that the moment was under control. You should not be here, Austin said softly, not the corporate freeze, but something more vulnerable. I know, Vera whispered. I'm sorry. I'm nosy. I have a bad hobby of being an accidental witness. It's terrible. I'll sneak back into the night like a sweater with a hole. Instead of anger, there was a softness in his gaze that did not belong in the glass-walled office. You saw me. The sentence was not an accusation. It was a fact stated with the weight of someone cataloging a loss. She nodded, surprised at how small her nod felt. He tried to stand again. The right leg cooperated a hair's breadth and then balked. The therapist counted, guided, offered muscle memory cues. Vera found herself standing beside them, holding her hands like a conductor unsure of the score. Okay, she muttered, as if coaching a plant. One step. One. Tiny. Brave. You can do it. Think of a beach. No, don't think of a beach. Think of a croissant. Wait. No, just step. One step. What should have been embarrassing was oddly effective. Austin's face shifted, tension easing into concentration, then into controlled humor at the absurdity of the prompt. He lifted his foot, then placed it, then lifted it again. Each movement a sentence in a battered conversation with his body. When he took 2 consecutive steps, the therapist's relief was audible. David allowed himself a grin. Vera, who had never been on the correct side of clinical progress before, clapped like a tiny fool. It was not elegant. It was honest. Austin's laugh came again, this time longer, the sound small but real, threading through the mirrored reflections like a ribbon. For a moment, they were not patient and CEO and therapist and stranger. They were a room of people seeing someone continue. It was intimate in a way the boardroom had no vocabulary for. Afterward, they sat, Austin back in his wheelchair, towel around his neck, breath slowing. Vera lingered like someone savoring an unexpected dessert, and then remembered social code. I shouldn't have barged in, she said, humility thick in her voice. You didn't, he replied quietly. You helped. She blinked at the word. Help. It landed oddly, like a coin clinking on marble. He looked at her with an odd candor. You make noise, he said. You make the wrong noises, but you make noise. It's not useless. He touched the parallel bar, and then himself, as if measuring how much he'd given away. Leave this to the people who are paid, Ms. Ramos. Okay, she replied, grinning despite the tremor. But only if you promise to keep working on the right leg. It's stealing all the glory from the left. They shared the brief private absurdity of a joke that didn't try to be weighty. It was the kind of exchange that, in an office that worshipped control, mattered more than 1,000 spreadsheets. They were not alone. On the other side of a tinted glass corridor, Juliet Hawkins stood like a statue, pretending to be a passerby. She had been making her late rounds, checking narratives, checking optics, when a light in the therapy room caught her eye. She paused, lips thinning as she watched the small scene play out. The therapist's steady hands, the man in the chair, the woman clapping like an over-enthusiastic audience member. Her face, at first composed, darkened. Juliet did not smile. Her jaw set into the kind of line that turned plans into war. She took in the details, Vera's proximity, the laugh she had provoked, the way Austin had not shut the door and locked the moment away. In Juliet's calculus, intimacy was leverage, not accident. This was an intersection of vulnerability and optics, and where others saw humanity, she saw an escalation in risk. She walked away slowly, the click of her heels a metronome of resolve. The hiss of the building's HVAC swallowed her retreat as she composed the pieces she would move next. If a night of therapy could birth a laugh, then she would manufacture leverage to keep that laugh from ever becoming a pattern. Vera's visibility would be contained, neutralized. Perception, after all, was a tool. Inside the therapy room, Austin wiped his face and managed, with effort, a small, real smile. Vera watched him, feeling something careful and protective stir in a place she did not expect. She had come to return a file, and instead had found moments that had no price and no PR spin, things that felt dangerous and holy all at once. When she left that night, she walked quieter than she had arrived. She tucked the absurdity of their shared jokes under her ribs, like contraband. The city outside the windows glittered, indifferent and enormous. Behind her, in a room that smelled like effort and laundry detergent, Austin Morgan sat with a slow pulse of something that might eventually be called hope. And Juliet sharpened her plans, a cold, precise thing ready to be set in motion. The shift in Juliet Hawkins didn't happen loudly. It happened the way temperature drops in a room, quiet, invisible, and suddenly unmistakable. After that night in the secret therapy room, something sharpened inside her. A decision solidified. She had spent years mastering the image of Morgan Tech, sculpting it with the precision of a surgeon. Chaos had no place in her architecture. And Vera Ramos, bright, clumsy, unpredictable, had become a crack spreading across the glass. She wouldn't allow it. Not again. Not ever. The sabotage began small, almost graceful in its elegance. On Monday morning, Vera arrived at the 40th floor earlier than usual, eager, clutching 2 neatly organized folders for Austin's 9 o'clock briefing. She checked the schedule. Conference room B, 10th floor. She breathed out with relief that she had gotten things right for once. She double-checked the time. She was early. Perfect. She even whispered a shy pep talk to the reflective surface of the elevator doors. "Okay, Vera. No disasters today. We're going to be professional, sleek, and..." The elevator dinged open, and she stepped into pure humiliation. Conference room B was empty, silent, dark. Her heart dropped. She scanned her iPad. The meeting had been switched, 5 minutes ago, to conference room E on the 12th floor. She ran, practically skidding into the hallway, stumbling toward the next elevator. When she burst into room E, cheeks flushed, hair wild, papers half sliding from their folder, every head turned. Austin looked up from the front of the table. "What happened?" he asked, brows lowering. Vera opened her mouth and discovered words were suddenly too heavy. "Room. Switched. My calendar. Said 10. Sorry, Juliet, seated gracefully near the center, lifted one delicate eyebrow and stirred her coffee with the bored elegance of royalty. "That's odd," she murmured. "My reminder updated perfectly." She tapped her tablet with a soft, pointed click. "How strange yours didn't. Might be user error." Her smile was small, precise, and wicked. Vera's stomach twisted. She wanted to sink straight into the floor. Austin looked between Vera and Juliet once, coldly, calculatingly. Then he said, "We'll begin. Ms. Ramos, take your seat." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't offer comfort, but he didn't dismiss her either. That small mercy threatened to undo her. Tuesday. Austin's daily operations file, usually loaded onto Vera's iPad at 6 a.m., was missing. Completely. Gone. She checked the shared folder, the backups, her email, the task management system. Nothing. By 9 a.m., Austin was waiting for the file. The silence of the 40th floor tightened around her like a noose. I don't know what happened," she stammered in his doorway. "It should be there. Every morning, it always..." "It isn't," he said calmly. Too calmly. "Do you know why?" Her throat closed, but Juliet, standing at the copier nearby, answered sweetly, "Maybe Ms. Ramos just forgot?" She didn't look up from her lipstick as she spoke. Vera felt her face knock against a wall of heat. She excused herself before she could cry, before anyone could see how deeply her chest hurt. At noon, while scrambling to piece together documents, she accidentally stumbled into the digital logs. The file hadn't gone missing. It had been manually deleted. 15 minutes before her shift began. 15 minutes before she even stepped foot into the building. A user with high-level access. A user whose name began with J. She stared at the log until her vision blurred. "Why?" she whispered to herself. The answer was cold and female and wore flawless lipstick. Wednesday. Her reminders didn't fire. Not a single one. She checked her system. 0 alerts for today. That was impossible. She had 12 scheduled events. She blinked, tapped the screen, rebooted the tablet. Still 0. Juliet walked by at that exact moment, her heels clicking like punctuation marks. "Technical trouble, dear?" she asked innocently. Vera met her gaze, really met it, for the first time. That was when she saw the truth. Juliet wasn't annoyed. She wasn't irritated. She was enjoying this. Every mistake, every flushed cheek, every frantic scramble. Juliet fed on it. She wanted it. wanted her gone. Everything fell apart on Thursday, the biggest day of the quarter. Investors from Japan, the UK, and Germany were present. Austin had prepared for weeks. This presentation was the kind that made or broke stock value. And Vera? She was supposed to load the presentation onto the main conference monitor. Simple, standard, easy. It was the kind of task she could do with her eyes closed. But when she accessed the master drive, the presentation wasn't there. Only a corrupted file. Unreadable. Empty. Her heart slammed against her ribs. No. She searched every backup. Nothing. The investors began taking their seats. Austin arrived with his usual precision, crisp, silent, unreadable. He nodded at the main monitor. Load it. Vera's mouth turned dry. Sir, it's... She swallowed. It's not there. I don't know what happened. Juliet stepped forward, voice dripping concern. Oh no, that's terrible. Was the file mishandled? Austin turned sharply to her. Did you see anything unusual? Of course not, Juliet replied softly. I simply assume Ms. Ramos misplaced it. There was a pause, thin, dangerous. Vera held her breath. Austin's gaze flicked to her. And in that flash of a second, she saw him scanning hundreds of data points. Her pattern of accuracy, her mistakes that weren't hers. The system glitches, the calendar sabotage, the deleted files. His eyes narrowed. Then he turned, voice slicing cleanly through the room. We proceed. But the presentation, Juliet began. I said we proceed. He faced the waiting investors. Due to a technical issue, he said smoothly, we'll begin verbally. Ms. Ramos, take notes. The meeting moved forward. Austin delivered an improvised, ruthlessly efficient breakdown of the quarterly performance. His voice held command. His tone? Unshakable. Not once did he give Juliet the satisfaction of watching Vera crumble. And Juliet noticed. She noticed everything. After the meeting, when the hallway emptied, he asked Vera quietly, Did someone remove the file? His tone wasn't demanding or cold. It was curious, careful, like he already knew the answer. Vera's chest tightened. She could lie. She could protect herself. Or, I think so, she whispered. He lifted one eyebrow. Who? Vera hesitated. Then, you won't believe me. Try me, she swallowed. Juliet. He didn't react. Not with surprise, not with denial. Just quiet, still processing. Then, go back to your desk, Ms. Ramos. Her heart sank. That tone, that phrasing. She'd heard it before, used on every assistant before her. Cold, distant, final. He knew. He knew, and he was done with her. She sat at her desk, hands trembling, throat burning. For the first time since arriving at Morgan Tech, she felt like she didn't belong. Not because she was chaotic, but because someone powerful was making sure she didn't. Juliet passed her desk on the way to the elevators. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply said, This building eats the weak. You won't survive here. Then she pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. She stepped inside. But just before they closed, her eyes flicked sharply down the hallway, watching, calculating, planning. Because Juliet Hawkins had decided her next move. A trap, a public one. One nobody, especially the CEO, could ignore. And she knew exactly where it would take place. The elevator. The only place where Vera would talk to herself. The only place where Vera's words would echo. The only place where witnesses would gather and listen. The perfect place to ruin her. To make sure Vera Ramos, accident or not, would be gone. For good. And Juliet smiled. War had begun. The elevator at 8:12 a.m. felt like a sealed audition. Fluorescent lights hummed. The metal walls kept the air close, and the volume of every whispered thought magnified. Vera stepped in at the back, clutching her tote like a talisman. Her heart beat shrapnel fast. She had rehearsed her silence for 3 days, and practiced a face like a blank page. Today she would be a professional, an unremarkable cog. Today she would not be a story. Of course, the universe had other plans. There were 13 people crammed into the car. Interns with nervous elbows, marketing managers with lanyards that proclaimed their importance, an HR woman with a face made of policy, 2 exhausted-looking lawyers, and, most dangerously, Juliet Hawkins, who filled the center of the space as if it had been designed for her. She wore the armor of composure, a white suit pressed so clean it could have been folded from light. She moved through the crowd with an ease that belonged to ownership. Vera took a breath and reminded herself of the rules. Don't narrate. Don't comment. Don't be the voice in a room that was not prepared to hear it. Pretend she was invisible. Pretend she was a shadow on the carpet. She failed, in the smallest and truest way. The elevator juddered and sighed, and somewhere between the 12th and 13th floor, a squeal of metal whispered like a reminder of all the imperfect noises in the building. Vera's hands tightened. She whispered to herself, softer than a secret and louder than she intended. Okay, Vera, breathe. Don't trip. Don't say anything about the microphone on the stage, not now. Don't— The words unspooled. The sentence she'd prepared to swallow escaped. And she cut the files. Then she deleted the backups, and if the world needs a villain, it's definitely— Her voice tripped into the air, then stopped as if the elevator itself had gagged. A dozen heads turned. In the sealed silence, a small, private eruption felt enormous. Juliet's face, already cool, collapsed into a mask subtly edged with panic. For a fraction of a second, she looked human. Then she recovered, practiced innocence sliding into place like a glove. What was that? A voice asked from the front, tentative, needing to know if they had heard correctly. Vera's cheeks flamed. She hadn't meant to accuse. She'd been muttering a defensive rehearsal, a private rant that had somehow turned into evidence. Now the evidence sat between them like a live wire. Juliet's voice, silky and deliberately small, tried the obvious path. I think Ms. Ramos is upset. Perhaps she is speaking about something private. We should be respectful. An intern near the corner frowned and leaned forward. No, she said Juliet deleted backups, he repeated, as if testing the accusation for weight. I heard it. It was, clear. Another voice joined. I thought I heard deleted, too. A woman with a marketing lanyard folded her arms and said, You can't just delete company files. That's huge. The elevator became a crucible. Whisper followed whisper, and the whispers formed a chorus that tilted the equilibrium. The air hummed with the electricity of imminent scandal. Juliet's face tightened in a way that revealed the first crack. She laughed, too light, too quick, and said, This is absurd. Why would I do such a thing? Preposterous. Her eyes flicked, quick as a predator's, searching for allies in the crowded car. Some looked down politely. Others looked up with newly curious suspicion. By the time the doors pinged open on the 20th floor, the car was a pressure cooker of opinion. People spilled out into the hall in little knots, a dozen mini-conferences born from an overheard sentence. Somewhere, a phone already had a text drafted. Did you hear? And the building's rumor mill began its hungry work. Vera stumbled out and almost tripped on the carpet pattern, so raw with adrenaline she couldn't feel embarrassment yet. She wanted to run to the safety of her desk, to hide in the small, predictable routines that had become her armor. Instead, she found herself surrounded by a bunch of colleagues who wanted to corroborate what they'd heard. She deleted files, one whispered. We need to tell HR, said another. Juliet, unfazed on the surface, moved with that cool harbor of authority and reached for her phone like a queen reaching for a fan. "This is slander," she said to the cluster, loud enough now that those far down the corridor heard. "Ms. Ramos is making reckless statements. I will—" She looked at the nearest HR woman with the calm of one who is practiced at calling administrative thunder. "Be filing a formal complaint." HR's face, professional and unreadable, straightened. Protocol would be followed, evidence would be gathered, statements would be taken. The machinery of corporate consequence, slow and heavy, began to crank. But rumor has a way of enlisting witnesses. People who had been in that elevator, 13 people, suddenly found themselves in roles they hadn't aimed for. They compared notes. 2 heard deleted. 1 swore she'd heard moved. Another had the technical know-how to say the words implied serious access-level tampering. The floor felt full of a collective pivot. Someone, brave, panicked, decisive, rushed to Austin's office. "Sir," they panted, "there's a situation in the elevator. People heard Vera accuse Juliet of deleting files." The door to Austin's office clicked. The hallway felt charged. He appeared at the doorway not with a look of amused distance, but with white-hot focus. When he stepped into the corridor, movement stilled the way it did when thunder rolled in over a quiet sea. "Explain," he said, and his voice had the crystalline authority of someone who could make 100 decisions with perfect economy. The witnesses gathered around him like a ring of small, nervous witnesses. One by one they recounted the truth as they had heard it. Vera's muttered accusation, Juliet's defensive laughter, the specifics about backups and deleted files. The timeline snapped into place. Elevator between 12 and 13. Vera's mutter. Witnesses corroborating. Juliet's claim to file a complaint. Austin's face did not twitch. For a heartbeat, it was unreadable. Then it hardened to a certain cold that had dispatched assistance before. He turned and walked toward the elevators. In the car, Juliet tried to spin a different story. "This is harassment," she declared, looking at the nearest camera as if the building itself might back her. "I have been subject to a smear, clearly a misunderstanding." Austin cut through it with a tone that required no drama because it contained privilege of the deepest sort. Finality. "Ms. Hawkins," he said, and the office corridor felt like a courtroom. "Come with me." Her smile flickered. She tried to recompose. "Sir." "Now." He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The command wrapped around her like a hand. She stepped forward because her options had narrowed to the size of a coin. They walked to a small conference room, the glass walls showing them to the building like a small theater. He sat. She sat. The witnesses took seats in the hallway to watch. Austin turned to HR and stated crisply, "Open an audit on deletion access for the past 7 days. Restrict Juliet's administrative privileges immediately." Juliet's mouth opened and closed. Her hand trembled. So small a movement, but it betrayed her. She was used to moving pieces, not being moved. "Sir, this is ridiculous. There is no proof." "We'll have proof," Austin said. "And if the proof shows tying deletions to your account, I will act." The audit ran. The building, greedy for spectacle now, waited like an audience for the verdict. Minutes later, an eternity in a corporate corridor, HR returned with a thin, steady packet. The logs were detailed. The user with high-level access had performed deletions at 4 a.m., 15 minutes before Vera's shift. The IP traced back to a terminal Juliet had access to. The timestamps matched. Juliet went pale in a way expensive lipstick could not fix. She tried to explain it away. A shared credential, an IT error, someone framing me. But each explanation sounded thinner than the last in the face of cold logs and 13 corroborating witnesses. Austin's face was a sculpted thing of decision. In a voice that removed any theater from the moment he said, "Juliet Hawkins, you're relieved of your duties, effective immediately. Return your keys." The sentence landed like a gavel. Gasps moved through the hallway like a wind. Juliet's composure broke into 100 tiny cracks. Her eyes sharpened with fury, but fury could not conjure alibis out of thin air. Vera, standing at the edge of the crowd, felt vertigo. She had never wanted to be at the center of anything like this, certainly not a public disassembly of a colleague, but the relief in the air was a physical thing, like oxygen rushing into a room closed too long. People crowded around her, some shaking her hand, others offering small smiles of solidarity. Whispers. "You did it. You were brave." "I'm sorry they treated you like that," rippled. Austin watched her for a long moment that felt like a balance being struck. The office leaned forward to hear what he would say next. "You did not do this alone," he said finally, voice steady and precise. "But you spoke truth. We need people who do not hide the truth for fear of repercussion." He turned to HR. "Prepare an updated role for Ms. Ramos. Executive assistant is insufficient. She will be assigned as my special projects lead. Temporary authorization to access the calendars and documents required for immediate operations. And HR, expedite a formal commendation. We will announce this now." A cheer, small, contained, professional, breathed through the corridor. People who had tucked money on her predicted failure muttered as they withdrew their bets. Juliet stood immobile, the last person to leave the small room, released not with dignity, but with the hard click of security escorting her belongings. Word sailed through the building faster than any memo. By mid-morning, the rumor transformed into news. Vera Ramos, the barista-turned-assistant who'd been counted out, was promoted after exposing corporate sabotage. Juliet Hawkins, the iron-curated PR director, had been fired for deleting files and manipulating systems. The contrast fed every coffee room gossip, every message thread. The company buzzed like an excited hive. A dozen colleagues clustered around Vera's desk, offering congratulations, clumsy hugs, and a single post-it pinned to her monitor. "You survived the elevator. If you're still watching, comment your country, because the next part is crazy." Vera read the post-it, then looked up to find Austin's profile in the doorway. He nodded once, small, private, and the office felt, for the first time in months, less like a machine and more like a place where people could be unpredictable and, somehow, forgiven for it. The complaint arrived like a paper cut, small, sharp, and oddly precise. It wasn't a public announcement, not at first. It slid across a desk 2 floors down from Vera's and landed on an HR manager's plate with the careful diplomacy of someone who knew how to hurt without making noise. The subject line read, "Concern regarding emotional stability of Ms. Vera Ramos. Urgent." The voice was clinical, the language surgical. "We have observed pattern of erratic behavior, inappropriate public disclosures, and clear risk to corporate reputation. Request formal review and consideration for termination or remedial action." HR did what HR does when given neat, plausible language and a frightened board. They opened an inquiry. They asked for statements. They scheduled an interview with Vera. They read the memo aloud in a narrow room and felt the hairs on the back of their necks rise. It was the kind of document that smelled like someone had both power and patience. Vera read the email at her desk and felt as if someone had put her chest in a vice. She reloaded the message 3 times in hopes that the words would reorder themselves into kindness. They did not. She called the number on her offer letter, Mr. Morgan's assistant line, more out of habit than hope. The voicemail was full. She left a tremulous message. "I didn't do anything. I did talk in the elevator, but..." She swallowed the rest of the sentence and hung up before the lie could curl into place. The following days were a blur of interviews and being watched. People were kind in the mechanical way people are when they do not know whether to be human. Polite, soft-toned, distant. She trusted the system less than she trusted the muffin man at the cafe, and that said something. On the second day of the review, she sat across from an HR director whose face was a map of neutral squares. "We have to consider optics," the director said. "Leadership needs stability. The board is nervous, given the sensitivity of recent events, high-profile investors, public attention. It might be better for all parties if you took some time. It was not a request dressed as concern. It was a suggestion with teeth. Vera stared at the table. The room felt smaller, closing in around the rhythm of her breath. She had always been a person who spoke to machines, and to herself, to get through long shifts. In the cafe, that habit had been harmless, charming even. Here, it was a dossier on the table. "I don't want to be a problem," she whispered. Her voice sounded far away. "I don't want to hurt anyone." The HR director softened, too late. "We can put anything on hold. A leave of absence, a medical evaluation. But right now, there's pressure. From investors, from the legal team. We need you to make a choice." Make a choice. The phrase landed like an ultimatum. Vera thought of all the small things, Austin's off-handed acceptance, the therapy room laugh, the elevator that had turned into an arena, and how quickly those bright things could be rationalized away by a memo. She thought of Juliet's final, poisonous whisper before she left. Subtle, practiced, a bird pecking at a crack, and felt it spread under her feet. That night she wrote a resignation letter on a napkin because stationery felt too formal for the way her hands trembled. She wanted to craft something graceful, someone brave, but the words came out blunt. "I'm sorry. I can't be the cause of trouble. Thank you for the chance. NH." Then she folded the napkin and slipped it into her bag like contraband. She left without saying goodbye. She left because she believed leaving would protect the man who had given her a second chance. Because she believed his world was too delicate for the chaos she carried like a jacket. She took the train north before dawn, the city shrinking into strips of light. By noon, her desk sat empty and her coffee mug weighted with a post-it of instructions she'd never read again. When the silence settled, Austin noticed it like a missing instrument in an orchestra. A day without Vera was a calendar of small betrayals. No playful commentary on a faulty printer. No late-night texts with absurd cafe anecdotes. The glass office seemed colder, the chair across from him more like a relic than an available seat. For months, his life had been a precise machine. The parts moved with the familiarity of rituals. Now a component had been removed, and the machine did not know how to compensate. He tried to focus on numbers. He tried to focus on meetings. He watched his screens blink through metrics that suddenly had no color. The jokes he'd told himself to neutralize the grind, dry, efficient, fell flat. The apartment he went to at night felt like a staged set. The silence there had less of the gravity of peace and more the pressure of absence. On the 5th day, her desk had been empty. He did something unexpected. He left. He did not call his mother first. He did not wait for an assistant to schedule an exit interview. He found the private number the investigator had left behind, an old-school contact that led to places people hid, and he booked a rental SUV, adapted controls already installed to his practiced hands. He packed a small bag and drove out of the city like someone escaping instructions rather than following them. The road north was a geography of memory. He drove past billboards and turned off where the map became dotted with farm stands and old barns. The air changed from iron to hay. He thought of the laugh he'd heard in a mirrored room, the cadence of a voice that spoke to machines like they were old friends. He thought of the way he'd realized how much he'd begun to expect the small interruptions she brought. The recognition pressed into his chest until he could no longer pretend it was only about productivity. Millbrook was a place that smelled of rain and laundry, with a main street that did not pretend to be anything more than itself. He pulled up outside a modest 2-story house with peeling white paint and a garden that needed attention. A man was hauling suitcases into a blue sedan, a broad-shouldered man with the kind of straightforward face that didn't bother with pretense. He laughed at something the woman inside said and shook his head like someone accustomed to small domestic dramas. Vera stepped out of the doorway, hair loose, jeans and a plain sweatshirt, the picture of someone who had deliberately opted out of performance. She looked smaller than in his memory, or maybe he'd just built her bigger in his head. The man with the suitcase caught sight of the rental and straightened, protective posture folding over his sister like a shield. For a second, Austin's chest ripped with a clarity that was almost pain. The man was not him. He saw the way they touched, casual, familial, and then the man threw a grin that could have been a cruelty. "Oh, hey, you must be Mr. Morgan," he said, hand half off the trunk. Austin's jaw worked for a beat. The assumption ached. Had she moved on? Had she found someone who was not a schedule, not a calendar, not a chart of recovery? His mouth opened and then closed. The words he had rehearsed, an apology, a demand, an explanation, did not find their way out. Vera saw him then. The surprise on her face was a small, bright thing. For a moment, she simply looked, as if cataloging the possibility of being found. Then something like fear and relief, and the memory of laughter crossed her features. "Austin," she said, and the name was both an accusation and a welcome. He stopped 3 steps from the porch and felt the absurdity of his body, 2 feet on a patch of suburban grass, his jacket sharp against a horizon of laundry lines. He expected a goodbye, a rejection, anything to justify the weeks of absence. Instead, he watched her close the distance in a way he had not expected, neither with the nervousness of a supplicant, nor with the polished certainty of a boardroom emissary, but with the uncomplicated sincerity of someone who had lived in small towns and understood the economy of hope. He had rehearsed 1,000 speeches about how he was a man who did not need distractions. Instead, standing in a whitewashed yard, he heard himself say, voice thin and real, "I have not laughed since the accident, until you walked into my life." The words hung between them like a confession. Vera blinked, a small laugh escaping her despite herself. "You didn't have to come all this way," she said. "I had to," he answered. He reached for her hand, and for a moment she let him, the contact like an agreement. The man with the suitcases, Daniel, her brother, stepped forward and offered a handshake, then a wary nod that said he approved of whatever reckoning was happening. Conversation trembled, awkward, then warm. Explanations that had been too heavy for emails found air. Vera told him why she left. The uncomfortable interviews, the way spoken words turned into evidence, her fear that staying would make him collateral damage. She told him of the resignation on a napkin and the trains and the fields. He listened until she stopped, then let her see that his own world had been a map of small collapses, the missing anecdotes, the empty chair, the hollowed cadence of laughter. They sat on the porch steps until the sun leaned low, and Austin confessed those things he rarely confessed to anyone. Fear that he might forget how to feel, gratitude for a laugh, a slow, private regret for letting a person who mattered leave without trying hard enough to keep them. "I was tired of being alone in a room full of people," he admitted. "You made it noisy in the best way. I didn't know I wanted it until it was gone." Vera leaned her head back and let a small, incredulous smile form. "You made me think I didn't belong there," she admitted. "And then you made sure not to fire me when others wanted me gone. That means something." He reached into his jacket and produced a small, practical envelope, papers stamped with HR headers and the company letterhead. "Come back," he said simply. "Not as an apology, not as a favor, but because I need you here. If not, then come back because I'd rather lose the polished image than this." She looked at the house behind her, at Daniel, at the small life she'd built to recover from being used to the city's rhythms. She thought of the cafe's clatter and the strange gravity of a boss who laughed at her jokes. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she said, "but only if there's coffee involved. And no pom-poms." He smiled, a full thing grown in stages. "No pom-poms." When she returned to Morgantech with him days later, it was not a triumphant parade. It was a quiet, ordinary arrival. A car, a suitcase, a handshake. But the office that had once been a machine welcomed her differently this time. Windows and whispers gathered into something like applause. The desk she'd left empty had a small post-it, "Good work," stuck in an earlier, more innocent hand. The world they were about to rebuild would be noisy, imperfect, and very much alive. The auditorium smelled like polished shoes and cheap floral arrangements, the kind of scent that tries too hard to be celebratory. Lights swept the stage in a slow, surgical arc. Journalists checked lenses. Investors adjusted ties with the focused calm of people who place bets with other people's money. The Morgan Tech annual press conference had the kind of scale that demanded perfection. Global live streams, translated feeds, analysts in the front row who could crush stock value with a single raised eyebrow. Vera stood backstage with her hands clenched around the laminated itinerary she'd been given, the paper a little crumpled from her grip. Her dress, a careful compromise between the cafe's practical humility and the evening's corporate gloss, felt foreign. Her fingers tapped the rhythm of a nervous bird. She had rehearsed her role. Stay near the CD, ça. Hand Austin his water, cue applause if necessary. And for the love of all latte art, do not, under any circumstances, ad-lib. But the world, as it liked to remind her, had other plans. From the stage, Austin looked like a sculpture, steady, practiced, composed. He walked out with that measured confidence that had been rebuilt in literal centimeters in a therapy room nights ago. The room erupted into applause. His smile was the small, authentic thing Vera had come to recognize. Less armor than she'd once seen in the office windows. He reached the podium. The teleprompter chimed like an obedient machine. The cameras locked. He began. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for what will be a transformational announcement for Morgan Tech. The lights blinked. A tiny hiccup rippled through the soundboard. Then, with the cruel timing of sabotage, the podium mic died entirely. Austin, used to operating at the intersection of focus and command, didn't flinch. He tested the mic, leaned in, and found silence. The broadcast stuttered. Cameras panned. The room filled with a gauzy confusion, the kind that makes leaders vanish behind the curtain of optics. Backstage, Vera felt the change like a physical chill. She watched Juliet's old haunt, the tech table, where a handful of people were already swatting at consoles, troubleshooting under expanding pressure. The lead technician's jaw hardened. Someone hissed, "It's sabotage." Austin made a decision in a fraction of a second that was the definition of risk. He did not kneel into panic. He stepped away from the dead podium and glanced for the face who had learned to translate his world into something human. His eyes found Vera. The moment stretched. Then, as if pulled by ropes of fate, Vera stepped onto the stage. She didn't memorize speeches. She didn't have a speech. She had her voice, untidy, truthful, immediate. She crossed the stage with the brisk oddness of someone who moves naturally out of fear. A mic clipped to her collar, a hand megaphone, whispered life into her words. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, voice amplified and bright as a bell, "we're having a technical moment. Please bear with us. Also, Mr. Morgan is about to tell you something very important, so you should definitely listen." It was improvisation wrapped in honesty. Laughter bubbled through the front row, a warm release. Austin, microphoneless, began to speak, and Vera, in that odd partnership that had snuck into their relationship like soft light, translated his cadence into something everyone could feel. He spoke of resilience, not as a corporate metric, but as a lived thing. He spoke quietly about the last 2 years, the accident, the slow, stubborn work of recovery, the way people had come and gone from his life. He spoke of fear and of gratitude. He spoke of mistakes he'd made in valuing efficiency over people, and of the absurd courage of someone who talked to machines and to herself, who saw the human in the sterile. Vera's voice threaded through his sentences with humor, with comment, with those improbable metaphors, croissants and stubborn legs, that made investors soften and reporters sit up straighter. She didn't translate word for word. She made him human. She made the room laugh, then cry, then lean in until every face was fixed. When he hit the part about needing to change the company, the teleprompter lights blinked with the technicians still scurrying, but the audience's attention had been secured, not by technology, but by something older, honesty. Austin stepped forward, voice steady, and announced a new initiative. Morgan Tech will launch the Ramos project, he said, each syllable exact. A company-wide initiative to invest in mental health, inclusion, and employment pathways for people who face barriers in the job market. We will provide scholarships, mentorships, and guaranteed interviews for candidates who need a chance. This is about rebuilding systems to value people, not just outputs. Applause rose and swelled into a standing wave. Phones lifted. Cameras blinked like mechanical fireflies. People who had come expecting numbers were caught off guard by a human story that mattered more than quarterly forecasts. The room rose, clapping, shouting, the standing ovation building like a tide. Vera's cheeks burned. She had never stood to thunderous applause in an auditorium full of suited strangers. A sensation like vertigo hit. Gratitude, fear, disbelief braided together. When the noise settled into a hum, Austin walked off stage and, with the small authority he'd learned to use in tiny, careful ways, led Vera by the hand to a quieter corridor where lights hummed less loudly and the microphones had no jurisdiction. He didn't speak for a long beat. The corridor felt like a place carved out of ordinary time. "You saved that room," he said finally, voice raw with something that was not quite composed. "You took something that could have been a disaster and turned it into our truth. You did more than translate. You reminded people we are human. That mattered." Vera blinked, her hands, still slightly trembling from adrenaline, curled into his. "I panicked," she said, honest, small. "And then I talked. It worked?" "It worked," he replied. "More than that, people listened. And because they listened, they stood up with us." They stood in the quiet a moment, listening to the distant echo of applause. Then Austin reached into his jacket and drew out a small envelope, official, stamped with the company letterhead. "We're launching the Ramos project next quarter. I want you to lead it, not as a symbolic role. Real authority, budget, contacts. You'll have the team you need. Will you do it?" Her breath left as if the temperature in the room had changed. "Lead it?" she repeated, voice trembling with the weight of possibility. "I want you permanently," he said, the sentence unadorned and real. "Professionally, you run it. Emotionally, stay. Not as a cautionary exception, not as a charity, but as my partner in this. I'm asking for both." The confession landed with a kind of gentle force. It was not a theatrical proposal. It was steadier, deeper. Vera felt the gravity of it, an invitation, an offer, a risk, and she let herself receive it. She could feel the smallness of the cafe and the enormity of the conference room both at once. She laughed, half sob, half pure disbelief, and then nodded. "Okay," she said, "but I'm bringing my own mugs, and you owe me coaching on elevator etiquette." He smiled, a slow, wide thing that had learned again how to be unguarded. "Deal," he said. They walked back to the stage hand in hand, their steps measured, the world watching again and now seeing them as something new. A man who had learned to laugh and the chaotic woman who had taught him how. Later, in the press release and across feeds, the Ramos project trended for a day, and then for a week, as people forwarded articles and called their friends. Inside Morgan Tech, the change was quieter. Teams rearranged, budgets shifted, lived policies adjusted. But the meaning, the human one, lasted in corridors, in the way people began to speak differently in meetings, in the way someone now could be allowed to narrate a printer's death without being written off as a liability. And, for Vera, the world was complicated and imperfectly bright. She'd been a barista who talked to machines, and now she was a woman asked to hold a program and a heart. Both were heavy, both were honest, both were worth the risk. Before you go, like this story, subscribe, share it, and tell me how you would rate it from 0 to 10.